Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not to Comic Book. This being a show where I talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Loki, Season 2, Episode 3. Great episode. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Putting all that diatribe aside, getting into the actual episode, we finally catch up with Renslayer. She's in, was it 1868? In Chicago, Sacred Timeline, which we'll get to in a second, and she meets up with Miss Minutes, and Miss Minutes is here being like, okay, you need to drop this book off in this particular place. I'm like, why? Because I'm like, I'm not getting that, but it's like, yeah, this is all part of He Who Remains' plan. I'm like, okay, and she drops the book in there, and there's a kid in there, and the moment that he opens up, and it's Ouroboros' TVA book, I was like, that's a young He Who Remains. I was like, basically, you're giving him the knowledge to become who he needs to become in the future. I was like, that's one of his variants. I was like, okay. But then later on, when Loki and Mobius ended up tracking him down, maybe I misread that, but I could have sworn it said 1893. Branch timeline. So I'm like, okay, well, I mean, it makes sense because that variant didn't go through life the way they were originally supposed to. That variant, because then my brain starts thinking like, okay, so is that supposed to indicate that variant is the one that eventually became He Who Remains? That person, that's not a variant. That is actually He Who Remains when he was younger. But by giving him the book, now you end up splitting off the timeline, and now Victor can become He Who Remains, because you changed his timeline. And once again, that way it's like it becomes a branch. That's why the sacred timeline kept going. So that person would have gone on to live his life and maybe would have become the He Who Remains we got to know in season 1. But this branched off version of Victor is the new He Who Remains. That's my thought process about it. They've kind of not been 100% fully delineating the timey-wiminess and alternate dimensions and the variants and all that. Like, I haven't really solidified that comfortably enough for a lot of people, myself included. I'm still racking my brain around it. That's my understanding of it. And like I said, that could even be, I'm probably most likely wrong, but like the fact is they went through the trouble of, because it's like, he can't be a variant of Kang if this is the sacred timeline. But then it's like, well, of this time, I mean, could we never actually verify what timeline or what, you'd assume it's from this universe is what that Kang, the He Who Remains is from, right? So you'd assume that was him as a child, but him getting the book a lot earlier makes him into another He Who Remains. Because I was almost thinking the timey-wiminess of, I was like, wait, are you going to say that once again, the Ouroboros of it all, the snake eating its own tail, not OB, but obviously Ouroboros is named Ouroboros for a reason, but once again, the whole snake eating its own tail of time being in a loop of this thing has to happen so that, like I brought up with the whole thing of, I'm pretty sure the person who prunes Loki in episode 1 was Loki himself, like a future version of him. But basically, I was wondering, like, if He Who Remains basically ended up creating He Who Remains, that it's a loop in that regard. Once I'm gone, I need to basically set the foundations for me to become the person I was meant to, and it's this endless cycle. But once again, we're dealing, I mean, even with the variant of it all, it still might be applicable that this might have been a thing that always does and always will happen because it's just a part of the cycle of this is how it's meant to be type of thing. Like the Avengers going back during Endgame was always meant to be. That's why it was like, oh, we can let that slide with it because the Avengers were meant to do that. So maybe this is just a part of just the natural fabric of the universe that He Who Remains kind of makes himself. Once again, that's what I'm like, but I'm not sure if that's how that fully works because we are dealing with a variant. But it's like, because He Who Remains, he's like, oh yeah, my variant. Every one of them is a variant. It's like, I'm sure the Kang from Quantum Media would look at He Who Remains as his variant. You know, it's all relative to the person, because it's like, no, I'm not the variant. These are the variants. I'm kind of the me. I mean, which once again kind of flows very nicely with the theme of this show, always kind of being about kind of identifying an identity. Which, I mean, that even flows into this episode, but we'll get to that later, especially with the Renona. I'm Renslayer, so I'm butchering her first name, so we're just going Renslayer. That's why I've been calling her before now, because I kept like screwing up the name Ravonna. But either way. So when it's all said and done, we have, like I said, Loki and Mobius here in 1893, Chicago, and they're trying to track down Renslayer and Miss Minutes, because they're the only ones that can help, like, open up the computer system for the loom so that everything can be adjusted. Once again, you got the machinery necessary to fix the loom, you just can't get access to it now because of the system, so... And they ultimately end up, what I thought was interesting, like on the poster about like, oh, Victor Timely, I was like, there was someone with the last name Lang up there. I was like, I'm probably reading too much into that, but I'm like, that, I mean, it just felt like that was too on purpose, you know? Because it's like I said, I'm not going to say like, oh, is that one of like Scott's like ancestors or something? But I'm like, it just feels too purposeful that there's some character named Lang. It was something Lang, but it's like you're on the same little kind of promotional thing as Victor, who's one of Kang's it just, like I said, I'm probably reading way too much into that, but that immediately caught my attention. I was like, what? That might have not even meant to be like a real thing. It might have been like a funny wicked nod. That's probably all it was. It might not be very surface level, like, oh, this wink wink to nudge nudge. That might be all it is. But either way, they go and check out the place and find Victor Timely, like I said, one of Kang's variants, and he's working on what is essentially the loom. And at first, when he's kind of doing the stuttering thing, I thought the way he was talking the way he was is because he's trying to remember the script. I thought everything he needed to know about what he was supposed to do was in that journal. To some extent, yes, but it's not a play-by-play of what he's supposed to say. Which, because I think I'm starting to, because... Funny enough, I mean, well, we know he had kind of the script of everything that would be said and how everything was going to play out. And I thought that's kind of that neat parallel of like, right, this Victor has got the journal, I mean, the book. And so he knows his stuff pretty well, where it's like, he's not so confident. He's stuttering and stuff in comparison to He Who Remains was so confident. It's like, right, had a swagger about him, right? Was just kind of like, cool, calm, and collected, meticulous, and very scary, villainous villain, right? So now I'm curious, like, it feels like they're meant, I mean, obviously, you're meant to really delineate between the different variants and stuff, but I think it's just kind of this interesting opposite ends of the spectrum that Victor is versus He Who Remains. So... But like I said, I was under the impression like maybe he was reading a script and he was trying to remember it. But it's like I think that's just his natural cadence. It's a kind of stutter and kind of. I think he's very meticulous about his words, so he's always tries to choose them properly. But yeah, he shows off the experiment of what he wants to do with the loom, and it's like, oh, it could be used to light up not just the city of Chicago, but the entire planet. But then he's also doing this bidding war, and he made a point of like, oh, I'm not going to be a partner, but then he's also willing to sell it off, and he had this smug smile on his face, and he's willing to bail immediately. I was like, you're a swindler, which is so interesting when you make that comparison to like, he's this liar manipulator. Yes and no, because for him it's like, oh, my inventions don't, I have the ideas, but the problem is the technology isn't quite where my ideas are. So I can't really make them come to fruition, but he's very good at like sweet talking people into like, no, I'll stop by and help you with those mechanical pens. I'll fix them, And he ended up like getting $1,000 off a guy because by selling this idea, which is like, we directly connect that to He Who Remains, who, what did he do? He sold the idea of like the TVA and what it could all mean for Sylvie and Loki. So it's almost this neat parallel. I mean, you'd also say that, I mean, because there's so many things you can even attribute to Kang and Quantum Media, him and Janet's whole relationship and situation, and the deal he kind of strikes with Scott of like, yeah, if you don't do this, your daughter's dead. So there's a lot to kind of be drawn in comparison in that regard. But, the problem is that so many things are going wrong at the same time. Obviously, Renslayer is trying to get to Victor, so is Loki and Mobius. But then you also have Sylvie showing up and it's like we're right back to the season 1 finale on opposite ends again. Now, what I think is interesting though is something we haven't really covered is we don't know exactly how much time passed between the season 1 finale when Sylvie was there at the end of time versus where she was when she went. I mean, time is kind of relative when you're moving across different time because we have no idea how long she was in 1982 in Wisconsin living her life. We have no idea how long she was there, but we also don't know how long it was before she got there after the events of season 1. Because you'd almost wonder, like, oh, did she immediately leave there after the fact? It's hard to say. Once again, time being the relative thing that it is, it's hard to say how much time passed. Like, especially at the end of time, it's kind of interesting that time can pass there, but it's like, well, it kind of exists because isn't that place kind of like the TVA kind of exists outside of time? Because jumping ahead, like we see Kang's body being like skeletal the way it is, so you're like, interesting. So his body did age, so it has been a very long time. Maybe time just works differently in the end of time. So a lot of questions. It's just the trickster nature of it all, of like Kang and He Who Remains and Loki and Sylvie. So interesting too, because Renslayer was making this point to Victor of like, oh, you can't trust Loki, even though he's trying to save you from Sylvie. It's like, yeah, but he worked with her to kill you. It's like, no, that's not the case, and I'm sure even Miss Minutes knows that's not the case, but you're trying to get him on your side. But maybe even Ravonna like really does believe that. I mean, the only people that were there are He Who Remains, Sylvie, and Loki. So maybe even Miss Minutes wasn't even there at the time. Maybe like after she said her piece to them before they went deeper in, maybe she disappeared. She probably didn't stick around to see how everything played out. She probably popped in later on after finding out like, okay, like if he doesn't contact me, he's dead, and probably went and found out, oh, he actually is. I don't know. It's also interesting too because staying really quickly on the lane of tricksters, that whole element of it. Obviously, Loki was like, "Are you kidding me?" And he sees this statue of Odin and Thor and Balder, and he's like, "It doesn't even work." Like he's like, for one, he's like, Thor isn't even that tall, and he's saying like, "This is some rough approximation of my father." And it's like, "Oh, you're just upset because," and he said something I thought was really interesting, where he was basically like, "You can't just like strip down an entire culture and everything into like one or three things," which I was like, that is a very poignant and interesting line of dialogue. Just even in real world applications, I was like, oh, that's so interesting because there's so much more to a culture and its people and everything, because I mean, it kind of almost goes along with the whole line of Asgard isn't just a place, it's its people. It feels like it almost fits that vein. But I even love that Loki was like, yeah, Boulder, like no one even knows who he is, which I thought was like interesting because Boulder kind of just gets lumped in as like, I mean, mythology wise, being the one that Loki didn't directly kill him. I can't remember who it was, but Loki manipulated someone into shooting him with a mistletoe arrow and ended up killing him. So that's the irony, because it's like, well, I guess maybe in this mythology, obviously it's not a one-to-one to traditional Norse mythology. A lot of things that adapt Norse mythology changes it to fit their needs, whether it's a god of war or so on and so forth, right? So it's interesting to think maybe in this universe, like Loki and Balder don't have that dynamic, or maybe it doesn't have, because that in itself actually ties into Ragnarok, but I think it does. I might just be basing that 100% on PS4 God of War. That might just be what that is. That might not even be traditional mythology. Once again, I'm going into this whole diatribe, but like I said, it's just the trickster angle just seems like it resonates and throughout it's so many elements of this episode in that regard of like, oh, people who are manipulative, trying to get what they want. It's so interesting that Loki gets demonized for being selfish when everyone else has got their own plans, their own play, what they want. There's selfishness kind of going all around. But getting back to the main thread that I kind of like strayed so far away from, I'm so sorry. Once I get going, I don't know how to stop. I really apologize. But getting back to the whole Sylvie thing, it's still that complicated conversation where it's just like Sylvie won't listen, even though Loki's like, this is bigger than you and me. Like, you can feel how you want to. I understand, but we need him alive because we need to keep the TVA from getting destroyed, because if we don't, time is going to run rampant and it's all going to end up destroying itself. You want to protect your life and you want to get back to it. I 100% understand that I'm not going to get in your way. Despite how he feels, it's like, you made your choice. this is bigger than that right now. Even how I feel about you, my feelings still being complicated, even after our run in last episode, it's still the thing of this is bigger than that, and we need to stop like the loom from kind of destroying the TVA, because everything will be destroyed then, so. But Sylvie's just like, no, he's too much of a threat, because legitimately, he scared the shit out of her. I mean, for one, you're talking about he's the reason why she's been on the run her entire life. This man, even if it's a variant, is associated with every bit of trauma you've ever been through, the fear, the anger you've had to live with in your entire life, that anger and that sadness, that loneliness, it's poisoned you. It's been in your veins for so many years, and it's like, what, I'm supposed to just like let it go? And it's like, she thought by killing He Who Remains, it would kind of alleviate that, and it didn't. So for her, it's like, all right, any variant that pops up, I will cut them down, because she's just trying to stop another monster from being born, because she recognizes him as a monster. But I think it's also the internalized thing of, I want to be able to kind of alleviate all that I'm feeling. Because if not, she's going to have to still carry that for the rest of her life. Even, once again, killing He Who Remains, knowing like, oh, there might be other variants out there. There are. I don't want to take the chance another devil rises, but it's also just a thing of, that poison has stayed inside of me, and it continues to poison me even to this moment. So that's why it just means so much in those moments. What I think it's so interesting too is we get because I really also appreciate, because we get more missed minutes in the episode, because it means we get more Tara Strong. Obviously we got a little bit of her last season, but I'm so glad that we get so much of her this episode, and we really get to kind of see a lot of missed minutes this episode, kind of like see how dynamic and interesting that character is, because we don't know anything about it and just what it really, well, we found out a lot about what she wants, but we'll get to that in a second. But you can tell she was getting a little nippy with Renslayer. Like, it's like, oh, I don't like her getting all the credit, it's me, I'm your greatest creation. And she kind of, you could tell she was getting a little like, ugh. Like, why is Renslayer getting all the credit? She wouldn't have been able to do anything without me. In fact, it wasn't even her plan. It wasn't even my plan. It was your great plan, He Who Remains. It's like, that's interesting. And even later on, just like, I don't know, it's this interesting moment where you just see her, like, when they're on the boat and she's just sitting on the railings, kind of kicking her legs back and forth. I'm like, I don't know, there's something adorable, but also very ominous about it, especially because she made herself look very old-timey rather than being the gold clock, yellowish gold clock she's been up until now. She made herself fit in more by being old-timey, and being like kind of even more, being very ghostly, pale colored. So, especially now that Victor now knows, like, oh, the person who left me the book was you. And it's like, well, once again, it was because He Who Remains wanted that. But regardless of it, Victor's like, I thank you. And you could tell with Renslayer, she was actually starting to kind of fall for him, which, once again, we know at least once I've heard in the comics, and even from that recording, that there is something between them. I doubt she's heard that recording. It was something, once again, I'm not quite sure which version of Renslayer that was or what, but I think that's going to end up playing a role in what Miss Minutes is going to tell her at the end of the episode. I'll go ahead and talk about it here. I think the thing she's going to reveal to her, it's like, yeah, you thought you were so in control. Yeah, in actuality, because she's like, I'm going to tell you something, it's going to make you really angry, because it doesn't seem like she has any memory of that. Like, she doesn't have the association with He Who Remains. So I was like, oh, so you don't know that he wiped your memory. Once again, it seemed like that was the case, but I wasn't sure. But she doesn't know, because she never found that recording. Only Loki did, about like, oh, he's like, oh, you're such a marvel. And so he must have wiped her memory for whatever reason, because it's like, right, I need your memory wiped because I need you to play this role of this Renslayer who has no connection to me, so that almost like you come to this in your own time if necessary. Once again, it's a long contingency plan that he's set in place, I'm guessing. But I think that's probably the thing she's going to tell her at the end of the episode. What she was going to tell her at the end of the episode is like, yeah, I'm going to tell you something about yourself that's going to make you really angry. That's the only thing that we as the audience know that I feel like could be that, not unless it's something we as the audience wouldn't know. So we'll have to wait and see. But getting back to it, they had this like budding romance moment. I was like, oh, this is actually interesting. Like, it's going to actually be a romance, which I thought was so interesting, because it's like, oh, like, it'd be funny and kind of sad that if things worked out with you, even though it didn't work out with Sylvie and Loki, which if we're going by like the notion of he wiped your memories, that means their relationship's just as, it's not as complicated considering they're variants of the same being, but it's also like, it's still a complicated mess, and so is your relationship. But the moment she's like, "Oh, I can't wait to enjoy this partnership," and in that moment you saw Victor lean back, and Miss Minutes, who kind of been moping a little bit, like, "Oh," you see her kind of perk up and smile, like, "Oh," she's like, "You fucked up." He doesn't like that. We know that ahead of time. He doesn't. He wants to be the one that's in control. It's like, you could be by my side, but we're not partners, because it makes it sound so equal. And I guess maybe on some level he's like, if there's a partnership, you'll try and take what's mine. You won't ever be satisfied with what you have. You'll want a bit of what I have. Why that's different from someone just being by your side, I don't know, but a partnership doesn't reign supreme for him, because it's like, no, this is my rodeo. I run it alone. I don't do partners, because I guess a partner will most likely stab you in the back. I guess if someone's by your side, they're with you all the way. They want no part directly. But no, because it's like, it's all the same. Because even Miss Minutes wants to be your the person by your side, not necessarily your part. It's such an interesting thing of like, I don't know quite what the delineation, why he personally has such an issue with it. But we also know, like, he who remains doesn't never, or, his variants don't do well working with anyone. I.e., kind of only person they worked with was Miss Minutes and maybe Renslayer, but kind of wiped her memory for, maybe part of the plan, maybe something else. But then there's also the Kang and Janet of it all. So it's like, partnerships never work out with a variant of that character. And so they ended up dumping her on a rowing boat and left her in the middle of water. But Renslayer was like, no, and started rowing after them. I love that whole creepy thing of Miss Minutes just sitting there and be like, bye-bye. And Victor kind of waves bye to Renslayer as well. But she wasn't going to probably should have done a little bit better of job making sure she couldn't follow you. Which, speaking of, another thing I completely forgot about, he ended up bringing up like, oh, this place in Chicago is where I do my business, but the lab I go to is in Wisconsin. Which I was like, that's interesting, because once again, maybe I'm misremembering, but because I said it earlier in the episode, I'm fairly certain that's the case. She was in Wisconsin, like where the McDonald's that Sylvie ended up at in 1982, Wisconsin. That's where she was working at the McDonald's. So the fact is that she was there in 82, and yes, we're talking about like a little less than 100 years down the timeline, but it's still the thing of, you would end up in Wisconsin. Like, once again, it's like, you got to know something that you just haven't talked to Loki about. Once again, we just don't know how much time has really passed for Sylvie, so don't know what to quite make of that. But I just think, like I said, I could be reading too much into it, but it's like, you just happen to, like, once again, it's almost a century apart, but it's still the thing of, his lab happens to be in Wisconsin in 1893, you end up in 1982, Wisconsin. Like, there's something there. To be fair, she does have his time pad or whatever, so maybe one of the settings is to different times in Wisconsin or something. I have no idea. It just feels like that was too on purpose. Because the moment he was like, oh yeah, my lab's in Wisconsin, I was like, wait, what? That seems like too much of a coincidence. Like I said, not less I'm keep saying Wisconsin over and over again, and maybe it wasn't Wisconsin that she ended up in at the end of episode 1 working at McDonald's, but I'm like, I'm fairly sure it was Wisconsin. I'm pretty sure, but I get stuff wrong all the time, so I could be misremembering. So do forgive me if I'm just being batshit crazy with that. But either way, the moment he got away from her, Miss Minutes kind of got a little devilish and a little scary herself. Kind of went full Fatal Attraction a little bit there. I mean, kind of already was, because you could, like I said, you could tell. It was like, it seemed like she's getting jealous. Like, does she have a thing for you? And it's like, yeah, it's this complicated thing of like, you're my creator. You made me this AI, and it's always been us for eons. It's always been us. The fact of the matter is, we would play chess and talk, but then you gave me something. You gave me my own autonomy. You allowed me to like add to my own programming, to become my own person, to have my own wants. But she was like, in all that time we were together, there's one thing, it's like, we go beyond like friendship. There's so much more. I was the one that was always by your side before any multiversal war, before the TVA, I was by your side. And the one thing that you would never give me, and I don't understand why, is a body. And Victor's like, oh, it's not something I can do. And then when she put herself on one of the mannequins, and her face, like, once again, she kind of gave you like tsundere like energy, where she was like, nope, not tsundere, yandere energy, by like twitching her eyes. I was like, you look so psychotic. And she comes rushing towards him like, oh, I love you. And he kind of like shuts her down. I was like, that was creepy as shit, homie. That's wild. I was like, is this supposed to be like a twisted version of her? Which I've never seen the movie, but I've saw the trailers back when it originally came out. So the very small idea of the movie, it's about a guy falling in love with a AI. I mean, it's funny I would use that as a reference because the AI was voiced by Scarlett Johansson. So it's funny but it felt like they were that was just like a really creepy moment. And I was like, she seems, because she always seems so cool, calm, and collected. I mean, because everything was a front and she's been devilish and evil. But then it's like, for this moment, it's like, you were so goddamn creepy in that moment. Like I said, gave me Fatal Attraction energy. It's like that wild. So, but I love that the person who shows up is Renslayer. It's like, no, you thought you were going to get away, and has what is essentially one of his prototypes to the pruning stick. Because when he opened a journal and I saw like a rod, I was like, isn't that the pruning stick? And it sure as hell was. He did pick up something. He was like, yeah, this is my greatest invention. It's like the culmination of all my... I was like, I wonder if that's kind of the device that allowed him to travel to different universes, that opened him up to allow him to meet other versions of himself. Like, I wondered if that's... Like, why is that device so important? Maybe it's something related to the loom. Maybe that's what it is. We always saw was like it kind of opened up. It almost seems like a spear that contained something, and then like the covering kind of covered it back up. I'm like, it feels like that was something from like the season finale, but I don't remember. But either way, Renslayer kind of made her stance kind of clear in this moment of, for her, it's like, and this was kind of her conversation to Mobius and Loki as well, where it's like, for her, it's like, the TVA needs me. Because what happened the moment I left? Oh, the TVA went into chaos because I'm the one that kept order for eons. The fact of the matter, and that once again might play into, well, you maybe not as much as you think. There's probably some hiccups here and there because you probably you're missing memories and you don't realize that you are. Because Renslayer, she's probably thinking like, right, I know I'm a variant, and, well, not unless because they all, like, she never really said anything about the conversation about being a variant. Like, so either she didn't think she was a variant, but it's like, there's no way you're not going to be a variant when literally everyone else in the TVA is a variant. So, but, like I said, that's why I'm going back to my point. It has to be about the memory thing, about her and He Who Remains and potentially wiping her memory. But either way, for her, it's like, I admit to lead the TVA because only I can. She's like, the fact of the matter is I sacrificed so much, my own happiness, my own life, and what I wanted. Because that was always kind of an inkling of maybe there's something between her and Mobius. But nothing happened, and especially after she, well, not only betrayed him, but almost tried to kill him, so. Because for her, it's like, I had to be the bad guy for the sake of this, to keep everything in order, and it was a thankless job, but you think you can do it. It's like, no, the sacrifices that need to be made, that have to be made, the hard choices. She's like, the things that you could never do, that you had to kind of come, because she almost made it seem like you're the terrible person, because at least if something terrible needed to be done, I would do it. You'd come to asking me to do it. Once again, maybe that's because she knows about, like, anytime, like, maybe referencing moments that Mobius never could remember. Maybe she thinks like, oh, I remember everything. They're the ones who had their memories wiped, not me, to keep them from knowing that they were variants. But I don't know. It's the thing of like, I'm kind of getting so lost in the sauce of it all that I'm like, I don't know. Like I said, in moments where I'm like, I should take things more as face value, or am I reading too little into things? Am I reading too much into things? And like I said, should I take them more at face value in some regards? But it could, like I said, it could just be a thing of like, I had this role as a leader, and it's just, I always, at the end of the day, I had to make the hard choices. No one else would. So I'm the one that's going to kind of run the TVA. And Sylvie shows up and giving the offer, she was about ready to kill Victor. And he's like, right, I'm not the person you think I am. And it's like, you are. because he's like, you don't know me. And this ends up being that conversation of like the age-old time travel question of, hey, if you could go back in time, would you kill Hitler? It's like, yes, because Hitler will grow up to do the atrocities that he does, but it's like, still going to end up killing a baby. It's not actually a one-to-one. This is actually an apples and orange, so it's actually a terrible analogy to go for. But it's just that thing of, yeah, I mean, I guess if you want to go over the Marvel Cinematic Universe approach, it'd be like, well, would you go back and, I mean, because of the way time travel rules were initially set up in Endgame, it's like, we could go back and, like, kill Thanos while he was still in his crib, which is very effed up to say, but it's that mentality of, like, you have the opportunity to wipe out the devil now, but it's like, the thing is, he hasn't done anything, and Sylvie, who pushes so much for the concept of free will, are you going to damn him saying like, right, you are who you are, there's no changing that? Do you not believe in free will? Do you believe that it's like, right, you don't know my heart, which I was like, funny because she stabbed he who remains in his heart. I mean, I'm assuming, but maybe it was just in his general chest, but I assumed she'd go for the heart. But, you know, that's how I almost expected her to be like, yeah, I do. I stabbed you in the heart. You just don't know it. But hearing all that, hearing what Loki had said previously about the loom and protecting all the times, and it's like, right, I have my fears and like nervous and my reluctancy about this, but he is right. How can I kill you for something you didn't do? Because at the end of the day, I will be doing just to you what was done to me. And that's what this all stems from. That anger, that sadness, that revenge, that loneliness. It's like she, just by existing, because they even showed it in the recap, Renslayer was like, yeah, I have no idea what your Nexus event actually was. I don't remember after all this time. But that's the situation with, it's like, am I really going to damn this person, you know, like I was damned for not doing anything? It's like, you haven't done anything yet. I'm basing this on something you could do just because it goes outside the realm of, like, the sacred timeline, the way things are meant to be, and how the TVA set up everything, how Kang or how He Who Remains set up everything. So, ultimately, Mobius and Loki leave with He Who Remains, Victor, but Sylvie's like, don't make me regret this. Obviously, for Sylvie, it'd be so much easier just to kill Renslayer. It's like all the history that they have, and it's like, I thought about killing you like 1,000 times, each way more harsher and more effed up than the previous one. But it's like, right, you want a seat at the end of time? Go ahead, and kicks her in there. And it's like, well, I guess as long as she doesn't have a time pad or anything, she's kind of stuck there. I guess maybe that's Sylvie's plan. But it's like, right, there's nowhere else she can really go now that it's all said and done. I still can't go back to the TVA. So she's kind of all alone. Well, her and Miss Minutes, the back and forth kind of thing that they've had going on. I even love like her coming back, being like, love you. And then she's like, oh, when she realizes like, oh, I got shut down and things didn't go a plan. She's like, darn. But it's like, yeah, so let's kind of work together. So I guess maybe they're kind of being set out to be potentially the secret villains of this season. Whereas they kind of seem like a variant of He Who Remains, which is going to be the main threat. Maybe it's not. It seems like it's all aiming to be like it's full on. Either it's going to be full on him, Victor in particular, maybe a different variant, or maybe it's just what role Miss Minutes and Renslayer have going forward. We have no idea. I mean, this is the halfway mark in the season. Still 3 more episodes to see how this all plays out. Because for both of them, it's like kind of like they're no longer going to try and support him as He Who Remains. It's like, now we're going to go our own way with all of this, just because it's like, right, he kind of turned his back on us and betrayed both of us. And he isn't the man. Well, I guess maybe the argument is like, maybe this didn't go the way He Who Remains thought it would, or maybe it went exactly the way he thought it would, and it's just not the way Renslayer or Miss Minutes thought it was going to go. But even all of this could be, once again, could be a 4D chess move of like, oh, you guys think you've got the plan figured out, this is what was meant to happen, this was what's going to happen. It's like, no, even your confusion and your missteps of saying like, oh, things went wrong, it's like, no, this went according to plan too. Maybe that's what we're dealing with in this 4D chess game. I have no idea. Oh, there was also one interesting detail where it's like, yes, those timelines were pruned, and it doesn't change the fact that them being pruned, all those lives are dead, but the timelines are continuing to still like splinter, so they are regrowing. They're just not going to be the same branches. Like, it doesn't take away all those branches, all those billions of lives were really lost. It's just those spots are being filled out with new branches being built out to kind of replace them. So it's not like those same time branches exist anymore. It's like, no, they are all dead, and now they're just kind of getting branched back out. A branch is growing to fill that void type of situation. So that was kind of a nice little detail they kind of get, but we'll ultimately have to wait to see where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. To the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.